Welcome! We always talk about space as the final frontier, but what if the most uncharted territory is actually right inside of us? Today, we're exploring 3 incredible discoveries that are completely changing how we see our own bodies, from how we handle the dangers of deep space to the literal wiring of our moral compass. Let's get into it.
So, let me just throw a couple of wild questions at you. What if you could send a biological virtual copy of yourself to the moon to see what would happen first? Or, what if turning back your brain's biological clock didn't involve some sci-fi pill, but just hitting the gym? I know, it sounds like something from a movie, but this is real science, and it's what we're unpacking right now.
Okay, so our first story kicks off with the Artemis II mission. This is a huge deal. It's the first time we're sending a crew to fly around the moon since the Apollo days. But venturing that far out into deep space means facing a pretty serious and totally invisible threat.
Yet once you leave the protective bubble of Earth's magnetic field, you are just bombarded with intense radiation. We're talking cosmic rays, solar flares, the works. Now, it's not going to be instantly lethal, but it definitely does damage. So the billion-dollar question for NASA is, how do you actually predict what that damage will look like on a person's body?
Well, the answer is genuinely mind-blowing. Organ chips. And I mean, look at this. We're talking about a little device about the size of a thumb drive, but inside are living human cells that perfectly mimic an actual organ. They're not just samples, they're functional. A lung on a chip literally breathes. A heart on a chip beats. It's a tiny, living model of you.
And this is where it gets crazy cool. For the Avatar investigation, scientists are basically creating biological twins for the astronauts. Here's the plan. First, they take some cells from the real Artemis II crew. Then, they grow that crew member's bone marrow on these little chips. And then, they send the chips on the mission right alongside the astronauts. So when they all get back, scientists can compare the radiation damage on the chip directly to the astronaut. It's the perfect experiment, a biological copy experiencing the exact same trip.
So, why bone marrow? Why not liver or kidney cells? Well, just look at this number. That's 200 times billion. That's roughly how many new blood cells your bone marrow turns out every single day. It's one of the most active, fastest regenerating parts of your entire body.
In fact, the lead scientist on this, David Shao, put it perfectly. He said your body produces a galaxy of blood cells every day, and all that activity makes your bone marrow super sensitive to radiation damage, which is actually exactly what you want for an experiment like this. It gives the scientists the best possible chance of seeing a clear, measurable effect, helping them figure out how to protect future deep space explorers.
All right, so from protecting our bodies in the most hostile environment we can think of, let's bring it all the way back home. We're going to shift gears now from just shielding our biology to actually improving it, and looking at how our body is way more of a malleable machine than we thought.
We've all heard it a million times. Exercise is good for your brain. But what does that really mean? Researchers wanted to get specific. They wondered if a certain kind of exercise, lifting weights, resistance training, could do more than just make you feel a little sharper. Could it actually slow down or maybe even reverse your brain's biological age?
So here's what they did. They ran a year-long study with healthy adults between 62 and 70 years old. They split them into 3 groups. You had your heavy resistance group, hitting the gym 3 times a week. You had a moderate intensity group, and then you had the control group, who were just told to live their lives as usual, no new exercise routine.
And after a year, the results were, frankly, incredible. The control group, no surprise, their biological green age didn't really change. But the exercise groups, their brains got biologically younger. The moderate group's brains were about 1.4 years younger, and the heavy resistance group, a stunning 2.3 years younger. It's like their brains were literally aging backwards.
But here's the absolute best part, and it's summed up perfectly by one of the study's authors, Agustin Ibanez. This isn't about becoming an elite athlete. This isn't for bodybuilders. The study proved that even moderate, consistent strength training, stuff almost anyone can do, has huge, measurable benefits for your brain. That's something all of us can actually use. Okay, for our last story, we're zooming in one final time. We've gone from the whole body in space, down to our muscles here on Earth, and now we're going deep, deep inside the brain to look at the hidden wiring behind a very, very human trait: hypocrisy. So researchers set up this really clever experiment. In one scenario, people had to decide whether to lie to someone else to make a little extra cash. Then, in another scenario, they just watched someone else make that same choice and had to judge how moral or immoral it was. You can see where this is going, right? It's a classic hypocrisy trap, judging someone for doing the exact same thing you might do yourself. Now, the scientists were focused on one specific brain region, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Yeah, that's a mouthful, so let's just call it the VMPFC. Think of this spot as your brain's central hub for moral dilemmas. It's the place that has to weigh what you want, like that extra cash, against what you know is socially or ethically right.
And here is the big discovery. When they scanned the brains of people who were morally consistent, people who judged others by the same standard they held for themselves, the activity pattern in their VMPFC looked almost identical in both situations, whether they were acting or judging. Their brain was speaking the same moral language, no matter what.
But in the people who were hypocritical, the brain scans showed a total disconnect. The patterns didn't match at all. It was like there was a communication breakdown. When it came time to make their own choice, their VMPFC just failed to plug in to the part of the brain that holds the moral rules. What this suggests is that hypocrisy isn't just a character flaw, it might actually be a biological glitch.
But they didn't stop there. To prove this was cause and effect, they did something else that is just wild. They used a safe, non-invasive brain stimulation technique to temporarily disrupt that VMPFC region in people. And what happened? People who had just been morally consistent suddenly started acting more hypocritical. They basically managed to turn up the hypocrisy by dialing down this one specific spot in the brain.
Okay, so let's pull all three of these stories together. We've been to deep space, to the gym, and into the nooks and crannies of the brain. What does it all mean? Well, it means we are finally truly learning to read our own biological code.
Think about it. We now have the ability to create tiny biological avatars of ourselves to send into harm's way, to test the absolute limits of human endurance. We've learned we're not just stuck with the brain we have the power, through simple, consistent actions, to literally turn back its biological clock. And we're even starting to find the physical, traceable source for behaviors as complex and as human as hypocrisy, right there in the wiring of our own minds. Each of these breakthroughs is like discovering a new line in our own programming, a biological source code we are just beginning to understand. We can protect ourselves, we can reverse aging, we can understand our deepest motivations. We are right at the beginning of this new chapter of self-discovery, and that leaves us with one heck of a question. As we get better and better at reading our own code, what will we choose to write next? Thanks for tuning in.